Welcome to the deep dive, where we take all the information you send our way and kind of condense it into the need to know stuff. It's your shortcut to becoming like seriously well informed. Today we're going to tackle a book that you guys suggested,
Oh, nice.
Modern Self-Defense: The Practical Guide to Protecting Yourself. It's by Chad Dinsmore.
Yeah. This is a great one. And Dinsmore's not just some guy theorizing about self-defense. He's a fifth-degree black belt in Kung Fu Sansu,
Yeah.
and he's got tons of real-world experience training, law enforcement and military personnel.
Oh wow.
So, this is going to be about practical stuff, what actually works.
Yeah, exactly. This isn't like theory. This is real world applicable stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And our mission in this deep dive is to basically give you the most straightforward, effective self-defense concepts and techniques
Mm-hmm.
from Dinsmore's expertise.
Yeah.
We want you to walk away with those aha moments, like, oh, I never thought about it like that, without kind of like overwhelming you with a bunch of complicated stuff.
Right.
Yeah, keep it simple.
Keep it simple but effective.
Yeah, and we've got a lot to cover. So Dinsmore, he starts off with the often ignored foundation of what he calls situational awareness.
Right.
Then we're going to look at choosing a martial art if you're thinking about training. Then we'll touch on the surprising power of verbal control and your mindset. Then the core techniques of hand-to-hand combat, kicking. We'll talk about the vital role of power, how to use your body as a weapon, the basics of joint breaking, and then finally, why understanding vital targets is so crucial. It's a lot.
That's a lot. But let's dive right in, I guess, with situational awareness. It's kind of sounds simple, like common sense almost.
Yeah.
But Dinsmore really makes a compelling argument for just how important it is, and especially in today's world.
Well, what's interesting is how he connects our everyday habits to being less aware.
Right.
Think about how often we're walking around like totally absorbed in our phones.
Yeah. Or maybe we're the ones like unintentionally blocking an aisle in a store because we're not paying attention. Like we've all done it.
Oh yeah, definitely guilty of that. The phone thing especially. You zone out
Well,
completely.
it's so easy to do. And Dinsmore, he points out that these aren't just minor annoyances. They actually reduce your ability to notice what's happening around you.
Right.
And that lack of awareness can really cut down your reaction time. And not just in self-defense situations. He gives the example of like a child unexpectedly running into the street,
Yeah.
and you're just not paying attention.
Yeah, that really hits home. It's not just about like, avoiding an attack. It's about being engaged with your surroundings, period. So what does Dinsmore, what's his key advice for kind of boosting that awareness?
Well, it really comes down to using your eyes,
Yeah.
right? Instead of staring at your phone, make it a habit to look up, look around, even glance behind you every now and then. Just be observant. Ask yourself, like, does this feel safe? Is anything out of the ordinary happening around me?
Yeah, it's almost like we've outsourced our attention to our devices.
Yeah.
We expect our phones to tell us when there's a problem.
That's a really good point. And Dinsmore really emphasizes how common it is, to see people just lost in their phones, making them more vulnerable.
And potentially the people around them.
Yeah, for sure.
So it applies, he even applies it to social settings like bars and parties.
Yeah.
That's something a lot of us can relate to. You're out with friends, you're having a good time.
Yeah, absolutely. Imagine you're in a crowded bar, chatting with your friends, you're having fun. But Dinsmore suggests, like, also make a point to casually scan the environment.
Right.
Notice if anyone's getting too drunk or if any arguments seem to be brewing.
Right.
Just being aware of potential trouble. Maybe someone's reaching out unexpectedly.
Right.
It's about being observant, but not like paranoid,
Right.
Just using all your senses, sight, smell,
Right.
smell for things like smoke or unusual odors, hearing for, raised voices or alarms,
Right.
and touch, being aware of unexpected physical contact.
So it's not just about seeing, it's about taking in like all the sensory information around you.
Exactly. He breaks it down into 4 types of awareness,
Right.
sight, smell, hearing, and touch. Sight is that active scanning for potential dangers like, crossing the street if someone looks suspicious.
Right.
Smell can alert you to immediate threats like a fire. Hearing, like we said, can pick up on warning signs like shouting or alarms.
Right.
And touch is about being ready to react to that unexpected physical contact.
And he draws a strong link between this lack of awareness and just like a lack of common sense, suggesting that our daily habits, with technology and just the modern world are making us easy targets.
Well, what's interesting is his focus on observation and hearing as the most critical senses for self-defense.
Oh, okay.
He's really cautious about people walking around like totally plugged into their phone with headphones on because you're essentially shutting down your two main early warning systems.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You're not seeing, you're not hearing.
Okay, so step one is break up with our phones a little bit in public.
Yeah.
But what are some like actionable strategies that he recommends for becoming more aware?
Well, he starts off by saying we need to look at our daily routines and identify where we're letting our guard down, right?
Right.
It's that core idea that there is no guaranteed safe zone in public. Anything can happen at any time.
Right, right.
His every corner you turn strategy is simple but effective. Basically, every time your line of sight changes, like literally when you turn a corner, just take a quick scan for potential threats.
Okay.
Nothing too complicated.
Right, right. That makes sense. It's like a mini check, every time your perspective shifts.
Yeah, exactly. He uses the bar scenario again, like choosing a spot away from people who are already, visibly intoxicated or behaving aggressively. That's a clear example of using your awareness to kind of steer clear of potential trouble.
Right, right.
And that leads into his idea of what he calls setting up the situation.
Okay. Now this sounds like it goes beyond just being aware of what's happening like right now.
It does. Setting up the situation is about proactively taking control of your environment.
Okay.
It's using your awareness to then mentally prepare for possibilities. So you've scanned the bar, you've avoided the rowdy group. Now, Dinsmore suggests, like in a matter of seconds, you mentally assess the people around you, their position relative to you, their posture, their size, and you think about how you might react if they suddenly became a threat.
So it's almost like a mental run through of potential scenarios.
Yeah, exactly. You're mentally mapping out escape routes, thinking about potential plans of action, even noticing objects you could potentially use as improvised weapons.
Oh, wow.
If needed, The key difference he highlights is that awareness is about what's happening now, while setting up the situation is about anticipating what could happen.
Right. Being prepared.
Being prepared. And he even mentions a pretty intense martial arts concept,
Yeah.
It's mentally planning how you would theoretically handle everyone in the room if they became a threat.
Right.
That sounds pretty extreme.
It does sound extreme, but he clarifies that, it's not about a desire for violence.
It's about it's a mental exercise to eliminate hesitation.
Okay.
Yep.
Yep.
By running through these extreme possibilities in your mind, you're less likely to freeze up if a real threat emerges.
Right. Right.
Because you've already considered your options.
Right. Yeah. Okay. That's a lot to think about when it comes to just awareness and setting yourself up. Let's shift gears now to another big question: choosing a martial art. It's something a lot of people are curious about. They want to know.
Absolutely.
If they had to, learn how to defend themselves, what should they do?
Well, he gets straight to the point.
Yeah.
He says there's no single best martial art.
Right.
And he emphasizes that every martial art has a purpose, and if applied correctly, it can be incredibly dangerous.
Right.
It's not about the style, it's about the application.
Yeah, that's a really balanced perspective because you see all these arguments online,
Oh, yeah.
and these videos and stuff, like which style is superior,
Right, exactly.
But it really is it's more nuanced than that, it sounds like.
And he debunks that idea that one isolated fight between practitioners of different styles proves anything definitively.
Right.
Right. He lists a whole range of factors that determine the outcome of a fight.
Right.
Things like age, physical fitness, weight, size, gender, their prior training in any martial art, their mental state on that particular day, even their actual street fight experience.
So it's so much more complicated than just the name of the style.
Exactly, exactly. And then he gets some really practical advice on how to spot a potentially ineffective martial arts school, which I think is invaluable for anyone considering training.
Okay, what are some of the warning signs he points out?
Well, he talks about instructors who seem like they've never been in a real, unpredictable fight, what he calls dojo fighting.
Dojo fighting. Okay.
You know, these are instructors who might teach techniques that look really impressive in a controlled environment of a training hall, but are unlikely to be effective when the adrenaline's pumping and the situation's chaotic. You can't predict what's going to happen on the street.
Right, right.
So he advises using what he calls a bullshit filter when you watch instructors demonstrate techniques.
Okay.
Do they look more like something out of an action movie than a practical self-defense move?
That's a great way to think about it. Yeah, you do see some pretty unrealistic demonstrations out there.
Exactly. He recommends paying attention to the instructors, more experienced students, and how they actually move and apply techniques.
Right.
His logic is, you train how you will fight, and you will fight the way you trained.
Yeah.
If the advanced students don't appear effective in their application, that's a major red flag.
That's a good point.
He does acknowledge that some instructors can be very effective teachers, even without extensive street fight experience themselves, if their training methods are realistic and pressure tested.
Right, right.
It's about the quality of the training, not necessarily just the background of the teacher.
And what advice does he have for actually, checking out a school?
Well, he strongly suggests taking advantage of any free introductory classes,
Right.
just to get a feel for the atmosphere and the instructor's teaching style and their enthusiasm. Are they passionate about what they're teaching?
Right.
He warns against any school that gives off a negative or unwelcoming vibe.
Right.
And he also raises a good point about large chain martial arts schools,
Okay.
suggesting they might sometimes prioritize enrollment numbers over the quality of instruction.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's a business.
It's a business.
Ultimately, he says to look for a knowledgeable teacher, techniques that seem practical for real-world situations, and a positive and supportive learning environment.
So it's about finding the right fit for your needs, not just like picking the most well-known style or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah. And then he breaks down how to choose a martial art based on what your personal goals are.
Right.
Are you looking for primarily fitness, a fun hobby, sports competition, or effective self-defense?
Right.
Why are you there?
That's a really helpful way to categorize it because there are a lot of reasons to study a martial art.
Right. For cardio, fun, and general fitness, he suggests things like boxing, kickboxing, MMA without the full contact sparring.
Right.
You'll learn the basics, you'll get a great workout, but it's not specifically geared towards serious street self-defense. For those interested in sports and competition, he lists a wide range of martial arts like MMA, Taekwondo, Karate, Judo, Muay Thai. These are styles that include sparring, and they have organized competitions.
Right.
He notes that while these sports have rules, they don't allow targeting of the most vulnerable areas, but they still provide a significant advantage over someone with no training at all.
Right.
If you're trained, you're going to have an edge.
Yeah, even if it's a sport.
Exactly.
And what about if your main focus is self-defense? Like that's the primary goal.
Well, this is where he points to martial arts that typically don't have competitions.
Okay.
And they feature limited sparring due to the potentially dangerous nature of their techniques.
Right.
Particularly the ones that focus on vital targeting.
Oh, okay.
So he mentions what's called demonstrative sparring, where techniques are practiced in a controlled way without full force.
Right.
You're not trying to hurt each other. Examples he gives are Kung Fu Sansu, which is his own core art.
Right.
Wing Chun, Krav Maga, and similar styles.
Okay.
He emphasizes the kill or be killed mindset and the absence of rules in a real self-defense situation.
Right.
There's no referee on the street.
Yeah, there are no rules.
No rules. He also notes that some of these styles use very minimal protective gear in training.
Oh, wow.
So, if pure self-defense is your aim and you're comfortable with potentially dangerous techniques and limited sparring arts like Kung Fu Sansu, Krav Maga, they emphasize that kill or be killed mindset.
Right.
You know, it's serious stuff.
Right. Yeah, it's not a game. And he even includes a really comprehensive martial arts style cheat sheet
Oh, yeah.
with brief descriptions of like a ton of different styles.
Yeah. It's very thorough. He covers everything from Kung Fu Sansu, with its emphasis on striking, kicking, and generating power, through what he calls windmills,
Hmm.
to Wing Chun, with its close-range rapid strikes.
Right.
He even mentions the movie Ip Man, you know,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
for a visual
When
reference.
it's visual. Right, yeah.
He includes Bruce Lee's Jitundo, karate, taekwondo, Krav Maga, judo, various forms of jujitsu, Kojikembo, Eskrima, Kali,
Right.
which he considers the best in the world for knife and stick fighting, plus boxing, kickboxing, Muay Thai, its more traditional form, Muay Boran, MMA, Aikido, wrestling, Sistema, and even ninjutsu.
Wow.
You know, he really runs the gamut.
He runs the gamut. Yeah, that's a lot.
It really gives you a broad overview.
Yeah, it definitely gives you a good starting point if you're just curious about, what's out there and want to explore different options. He also mentions that you can actually learn some fundamental fighting principles just from reading his book,
Right.
even without formal classes.
That's right. He suggests practicing on a training dummy, a punching bag with a willing training partner, or even doing what's called shadow training, just practicing the movements.
Right.
He does caution that truly mastering any martial art takes, a lifetime of dedication.
Right.
And he acknowledges the effectiveness of combining different arts,
Right.
like you see in MMA.
Right. MMA. Yeah.
But he reassures listeners that most self-defense-oriented arts will teach you enough to protect yourself in a typical situation.
Okay.
While he recommends finding a good school for proper guidance and practice, he says you can still gain valuable knowledge from his book on your own.
Okay. Yeah. That's encouraging. And he wraps up that this section with some really helpful tips for your first day of martial arts class.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a nice touch for anyone who might be feeling a little nervous about starting out.
Absolutely. He advises to stay calm and relaxed, emphasizing that a good instructor will create a supportive environment and avoid making beginners feel intimidated.
Right.
They want you to come back.
Right.
He highlights the difference between genuine confidence and ego in an instructor.
Okay.
There's a difference there.
Big difference.
He encourages being honest about any previous martial arts experience you have, noting that sometimes it's actually easier to teach someone with no prior training because you don't have to break any bad habits.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
He reminds new students not to get discouraged on the first day.
Right.
Because there will be a lot of new information coming at you, and to find motivation by observing the more experienced students.
Right. Okay.
You can see what you're working towards. He stresses the importance of being friendly, as most martial artists are humble and respectful, and to steer clear of schools where there are egotistical or bullying individuals.
Right.
That's a big red flag.
Yeah.
And finally, he says to have fun.
Oh, yeah.
Reminding us that learning self-defense should be an empowering and enjoyable experience that builds confidence.
Right. That's great advice.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's some really practical guidance for navigating that world, because, it can be intimidating.
Oh, it can be.
Especially if you're new to it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Let's move on now to a less physical but equally critical aspect.
Mm-hmm.
Verbal control and mental training.
The mental game.
Yeah.
This is where Dinsmore goes beyond just the physical techniques,
Right.
and delves into that crucial mental preparation. He introduces verbal control as a primary tool to potentially avoid a physical confrontation altogether.
Right.
Which, as he rightly points out, is the best possible outcome for everyone involved.
Right, exactly. Nobody gets hurt.
Nobody gets hurt, exactly. Right. He even shares a personal story about using verbal control to diffuse a potentially dangerous situation with a group of angry, intoxicated men at a bar.
Oh, wow.
That sounds like a real-world test of those principles.
Oh, yeah. That's putting it to the test.
It was, and he breaks down the first key to effective verbal control, projecting positive energy.
Okay.
He emphasizes the importance of remaining calm and maintaining a positive demeanor regardless of what you might be feeling internally.
Right.
You don't want to let your emotions get the better of you.
Right.
The core message is to never let someone else dictate your emotional state.
Okay.
You're in control of your emotions, not them.
Right. Right. Don't let them push your buttons.
Exactly. And he stresses that physical fighting should always be the absolute last resort. After you've exhausted all options for verbal de-escalation and escape.
Right. You always want to try to get away first.
Absolutely.
If
You can.
Yeah.
If you can.
Yeah.
So it's it's about using your calm presence to try and defuse the situation.
Right. Right.
He explains the idea of trying to transfer that positive energy to a negative or aggressive person,
Okay.
suggesting that sometimes your positivity can make them realize their own negativity is unwarranted.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Kill them with kindness kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
He even provides the specific example of what he said in that bar situation. He said, hey, friend, I'm sorry we upset you. We're just here trying to have a good time. We could leave if you want.
Right.
And he emphasizes the importance of delivering these words in a calm and non-confrontational tone.
Right. Right. It's not what you say, it's how you say it.
It's how you say it.
Yeah.
He even mentions the somewhat risky technique of gently touching the aggressor as a way to try and convey that positive energy.
Wow. Okay.
That definitely takes a certain level of courage and awareness.
Oh, yeah. You gotta read the situation very carefully before you try that one, I think.
It does, and he acknowledges the potential risks involved,
Right.
but the underlying principle remains. The best way to win a fight is to avoid it entirely.
Right. Yeah.
If you don't fight, you can't lose.
Exactly. Exactly. Then he kind of transitions to mental training, which is all about, preparing yourself mentally for the intense experience of a physical confrontation.
Right.
Especially if you don't have, any previous fighting experience.
Right. Right.
So, what are some of the key mental aspects that he covers?
Well, he talks about the intense emotional state that you might experience,
Right.
a simultaneous surge of anger, fear, and adrenaline.
Right.
He even uses the term anger tears. You're so angry, you're crying. He explains the body's natural fight or flight response triggered by adrenaline, which can paradoxically impair your short-term memory.
Oh, wow.
While also making your body feel stronger and less sensitive to pain due to the release of natural painkillers.
So it's like a superpower almost, but also, can be a detriment.
Exactly. The key, he says, is learning to manage this intense emotional and physiological state.
Right. Okay.
He stresses the importance of controlled deep breathing to prevent panic and even passing out, and to actively focus on the immediate situation.
Because you got to breathe. You got to stay present.
Stay present, stay calm.
Yeah.
He reassures listeners that feeling fear is a natural response, even for seasoned fighters.
Right.
Everyone feels fear.
Right.
The crucial thing is to not let that fear paralyze you.
Right.
Right. Control it.
Control the fear. Yeah.
He also advises being mindful of your own words.
Yeah. Okay.
And not letting an opponent's taunts or insults provoke you emotionally.
Right.
The goal is to disengage from the conflict, not to win a verbal sparring match.
Right. Yeah. Trash talk is not gonna help you in a real situation.
Not at all.
Okay.
Then he introduces this light switch analogy for making the decision to physically engage.
Okay. That sounds like a very clear mental commitment.
It is. He says when you decide that a physical response is absolutely necessary, it needs to be a complete and unwavering commitment. The switch flips to on at 110%,
Right.
There's no room for hesitation. He also discusses situations where a physical attack might happen suddenly before you even have time to process those pre-fight emotions,
If it's a surprise attack.
If it's a surprise attack, you're caught off guard. In those cases, you just have to instantly go into a reactive fight mode.
Right.
It's react or be hurt.
Yeah. Yeah. He really emphasizes taking personal responsibility for your emotions as like a fundamental skill,
Yeah, yeah, right.
not just for self-defense, but for navigating all aspects of life.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right.
He makes the point that just because a thought pops into your head doesn't mean you have to dwell on it or act on it.
Okay.
It's about learning to filter your thoughts and choosing those that will lead to positive outcomes.
Right. Right.
He gives the example of someone being verbally aggressive toward you in public and advises against letting them dictate your emotional response.
Right. Right.
Instead, try to respond calmly and disengage as a physical altercation over something trivial is rarely worth the risk.
Right. You don't want to end up in jail over